Hello friends, we're going to do another YouTube video for this course on doing ministry in context. None of you complained about the last one, although it looks like only 2 of you actually viewed it, so I'd encourage those of you who didn't view it to do so. This video, if I'm going to give a title to it, I'd call it Common Sense and Contextual Ministry. In the midst of a course, it's good to stop every once in a while and try and gain perspective. So one way to do that is I'd like you to go back to your syllabus and read again the course description. It's down a little bit as you go through the course or the syllabus, and take a look at that. And one of the things I would say is we've learned some excellent concepts and approaches for doing ministry in context. However, we don't want to ignore some very practical, common sense principles for any cross-cultural encounters. They all center on ways we need to change ourselves in order to access the culture in a good manner. So here are some areas for consideration, and I'll be giving some examples too, which come out of the blog that my daughter and her husband, who are missionaries in Niger, send out. Their blog spot is outofthedustandus.blogspot.com if you want to take a look at it. We have 3 sections to this. The first common sense thing I would share is to value the culture. 3 points I want to make under this. In every way possible, reinforce the many positive aspects of the culture. This culture, or maybe it's a subculture, a subtle and tiny subculture, each one is different in some way from your own culture and has unique richness that's all of its own. So focus on different and positive, not inferior or bad or things you dislike kind of thing. Lift up the positive and the richness of the culture. Number 2, when you show an eagerness to learn from those in the culture and ask questions, seeking understanding, it shows that you value the culture. Just a plain and simple way of valuing culture is by an eagerness to learn about it. The third point under valuing culture is to allow people to see positive values in your culture as well. Don't be afraid to sensitively and appropriately be countercultural. Here's a place where I share an example from my daughter Rachel and her husband Michael. One of the things that they value is playing with their children. In the culture where they are, that's not a common practice. That's not something you see. Parents interacting with the children, going out, a father, and kicking the soccer ball with his son or daughter. It's just not something that's seen in a common way. And they make a point to model it as they go out in the street to play, as they play in their own home, and as children from the neighborhood are there, because they see it as a positive value. And what they found is the neighborhood children value it too. They want to be included in this play. They have great respect for Michael and Rachel and enjoy being around them because they play with them. So that's the first part of valuing the culture. I'm sure I could make some more points, but enough said here. The second kind of common sense aspect of contextualized ministry is about our attitudes, adjusting our attitude. And I want to make 4 points here. First, before you engage the culture, pray. Pray again, pray some more, pray as you do engage the culture. Pray that God will give you a sensitive heart, a gracious spirit, an open mind. All of these things are essential. And an example that Rachel shares in their blog, that she was becoming very discontented because the culture in which they live is so different. And it's often very lonely for them there, as well as just the acts of daily living are difficult to do. And what she managed to do in the midst of her discontentment was to think about those who have no choices, those around her, because she and her husband made a conscientious choice. Yes, a sacrificial choice, but a choice to go and live in that setting. They had the option before they left the United States to make all kinds of choices about where they'd live and what they'd eat and what they'd wear and so many things for their health and well-being. The people around them have such limited choices in this very, very poor and underdeveloped cultural setting. So she looks around and she sees the suffering that's going on and sees that there just aren't options. And what that does is that's an act of prayer that helps her then to be open to this culture and the people of this culture. It's an attitudinal adjustment. Second, it's about bringing a listening, learning posture of humility into everything we do. Here's another example. A neighbor came in to their yard. These are walled-in yards that everybody has, and criticized them for not sweeping their yard. And they said, it's dirty. Well, yeah, there were leaves around, but they didn't consider it dirty in an offensive way. But she began to think about it and realized how important sweeping the culture or the yard is in that culture, because people live outside. They cook outside. They throw their dishwater outside. They throw their scraps around. They litter. They don't worry about putting things in a wastebasket. They just drop them on the ground, and then later they sweep them up. Also, most people around their houses, in their yards, they have animals. They keep animals. And of course, you need to clean up after the animals. So daily sweeping your yard is something that's important to do in that culture. Even though it's not valued in ours, it shouldn't be despised by us. So here's something about an attitude of humility as we encounter different kinds of practices in cultures. You know, what I'm showing, or the examples I'm giving, are more radical because they live in a very different culture. But they apply even when the cultures are very much like ours. Third thing is to draw as close to people as you can in order to build empathy and to nurture feelings of compassion. Compassion is a godly characteristic. Again, in the blog, Rachel speaks about compassion for children. Compassion for children that developed in a number of ways. Developed because each of her children have had malaria. And particularly one time when one of her sons had malaria and high temperature, so uncomfortable and miserable, unable to sleep, and she got no sleep because of it either, and that went on for several days. She began to realize and look around how fortunate that they could get medicine for their son. His malaria wasn't going to be deadly. Whereas children they knew in the neighborhood, families with which they were friends, had lost children to malaria. While they were there, numerous children that they know have died of malaria. So it began to build a compassion that was deep and abiding for these people and this culture. Fourth is to counter any feelings of negativity or judgment we have towards aspects of the culture. Counter those negative and judgmental attitudes with feelings of love. Rachel took food to a family that had expressed they had a need. They didn't have any food. And then after she did so, the following Sunday, she found, excuse me, that the mother had a new dress. The women in the church will periodically get the same material, have it made into dresses. That's a part of the women's guild for the church. And that following Sunday, after having no food in the home, the mother had a new dress. And Rachel was really angry, upset. Why would this woman choose to spend her money on a new dress when there's no food for her family? And in time, she began to turn that attitude around and see that regardless of the different values held in their culture and her cultural values, that she needed to show compassion. She needed to have an attitude of expressing love and of caring for those who had no food. So what it is a conscientious effort to move beyond, to identify first our negative feelings towards culture and people in that culture, and then to turn that around into attitude of love. The third area in which I want to talk is about how we pursue relationships and common sense ideas about how we do that. First of all, to be intentional, to go places where people hang out, where they spend time, and to meet them where they are, where they live, work, and play. That's important for us to do intentionally. After they eat dinner, and they eat at an early hour, even though culturally they eat later, after their dinner, before dark, they and their children go out into the street to play, because that's where the children play, on these dusty dirt streets in the edge of this town where they live. And they play soccer a lot, but they climb a tree, they do other games of tag and so on, as the children just play together. So they intentionally go out and play with the children of the neighborhood. They intentionally go and visit their neighbor because that's a cultural value, to regularly go and see your neighbor and carry greetings to your neighbor. Second thing to do in building relationships is to confess our bias. The bias we have for our own cultural values and against the values of the new culture. I'll share an example that's personal here, as I have traveled a lot. One of the things that really bothers me in most every culture I've been in is the litter. That people just throw their candy wrapper or throw any kind of thing on the ground. Some places just so many plastic bags that are everywhere. And it's so bothersome to me that people don't care enough to take care of their environment and what they have. And so I've had to confess that and to put it aside in an intentional kind of way in order to build relationships, so that bias I have against another culture doesn't prevent me from drawing near to people. The third thing under building relationships is to be open and to look for opportunities and initiative to spend quality time with members of that culture. My son-in-law, Michael, regularly on a kind of a weekly basis will go out and play cards with the men in the neighborhood. Or when one of the neighbors died, go and sit with the men of the neighborhood, because that's the cultural thing to do. That's the way to get to know the men. He also will go regularly to a public place to watch soccer games, because soccer is the sport of the country. Excuse me. The fourth thing about pursuing relationships is to be vulnerable, allowing those you seek to know you and to see you as you are. So to be honest and to find ways in which to show your shared neediness. The basic human needs we have for companionship, the basic human needs that we have for health and well-being, to be vulnerable in the sharing of those things. And fifth, and finally, under building relationships, I want to say something about returning hospitality that is extended to us. And here's an example where Rachel shares also, is she has become the neighborhood nurse. Excuse me, even though she has no medical nursing first aid kind of background, just the simple like anyone else. We know how to put a bandage on, we know how to put an antibiotic on, we know how to wash a wound, and that's what she's doing. That's all she's doing, because people either go barefoot, the children particularly, or they wear sandals. Their feet are often getting cut, they get dirty, they get infected, other kinds of issues like that. People know that Rachel has medicine and that she will help them as she seeks to return the hospitality to her neighborhood that her neighborhood has extended towards her. So those are some things. I'm sure you can add some things too. I'm going to put a little learning task assignment on the website so that you can follow up to this video and the other things here for Lesson 8. Thanks for listening. Tried not to be too long. I hope it was something valuable, and I know you can add to it yourself. That's it.